Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Today we have Nigel Morris from
Business Services.
Services. Let's start. Nigel has like 20 years of experience in solar energy. He did almost everything. He was installer, he was designer, he was salesman. He was involved with different international companies and was involved with quite a big project across the world. 5 years ago, he established his company, consulting company that worked with research institute, with companies, with government. So he had a large experience with this one. A few months ago, he started another business that it's on electric cars. So
Bikes, only bikes, no cars.
So please welcome Nigel. I'm sure that we will enjoy his talk.
Thank you, Ziv. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Great to see some familiar faces and lots of new faces. And I'm always reminded, it's too long between drinks coming here, but I'm always reminded that you guys are the future of our industry. So hopefully there's a few bits and pieces in here for you. I've got a lot of slides and I'm not going to spend lots of time. I'm going to whiz through and try and take you through the biggest picture of the industry that I can give you, particularly on what the big news is and what's going on at the moment and what the challenges are that we're facing in the industry. Brief introduction of the stuff that we do. About half of what we spend our life doing is industry research, so particularly focused on the PV industry in Australia, a bit of work offshore, but lots and lots of data, and then we use that data as the basis for helping solar businesses to grow, and a little bit of work in engineering and consumer support and so forth. So that's what we do. Data comes from a load of different places, so just a quick acknowledgement of all those different sources. Excuse me. Always helps to start by painting the picture about where the market is in Australia. And I actually read something interesting this morning that the US was getting all excited because they thought they might have 3 million residential solar systems by 2018. Which they're very, very excited about. Well, Australia's already got 1.5 million almost today, and so by 2018 it's quite reasonable to expect that we'll be very close to that same number that they're looking for in the US already. Our market is really a 99% residential market. It's slowly changing. Whether that's good, bad or indifferent, that's just the way it is. And you can see the data there that shows our history, number of systems per year roughly on the right-hand side, and the kilowatts or megawatts on the left. So our market peaked in 2012. 2012. At about a gigawatt of installations in a year, which is quite a remarkable result, especially when you consider that they were almost all quite small residential systems. It was a perfect storm of rebates, foreign exchange price reductions, PV price reductions, state rebates, federal rebates, you name it, everything came together and the market just absolutely took off. And you know, the support industry behind that, which is where I kind of focus my attention, has exploded behind it. You know, when I started in this industry, there were about 30 companies who did solar in Australia. Today, there's roughly 3,500. So we have probably more residential installation companies than any other market in the world. It's really an incredible result, and of course a ferocious amount of competition and diversity of offers and everything else. So great news, but of course if I'll just go back a step, you'll see, you know, things have changed quite a lot since the peak. The market's come right down, especially if you look at the residential numbers there. So although we've had this great growth, you know, the market's really come off the boil, and I pinched some data from the APVI's great live data website that's out there if you want to see live data. It's up to date and current, so I grabbed it this morning just to have a quick look. And so, as you can imagine, if you're a solar dealer or a solar installer or a retailer or a wholesaler out there, you're watching the market contract at the moment. So it's quite tough for businesses out there. The good part about that is that it's not it's not an erratic market that's being driven so much by rebates. So the market used to kind of boom and then bust and boom and bust as rebates switched on and off or feed-in tariffs came and went. At the moment, it's just kind of doing its thing. So we're actually in this really interesting place where it's the underlying organic demand that we're seeing now. So it's a little bit more stable, albeit smaller, which is tough when all those businesses are out there trying to make a cut. When you look at going forward, sorry, these are actually some of our confidential numbers, which I will share with you, but I'll give you a couple of warnings around them. Firstly, they're not completely up to date, so don't take them and build a business based on these numbers because they've already changed. Secondly, you really need to understand them in context. This is a medium level forecast. We do a low and a high and a variety of other things, and so don't go out and make any big decisions based on these numbers, I guess is my warning. What it shows you is where we're heading to, we think. We usually get within about 3 or 4% when we forecast the market forward. Each year we do a 5-year forward forecast, and we're typically within a few percent of the right number on our medium level forecast. So we're getting pretty schmick at this. And as you can see, residential is going to come down, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. And what we're starting to already see is the medium-sized rooftop commercial market starting to really build nicely. There's a very low penetration rate on a huge number of commercial buildings in Australia, so loads and loads of potential. And large scale, the GCC all, if you like, that's Grid Connect Central, so that's power station type stuff. We've heard about Nyngan coming online in the last week to its almost full capacity now, and there's some other terrific large scale projects. You can see a couple of lumps and bumps there, which are basically those large projects. There isn't a huge amount of large project activity yet, but we expect that to accelerate, especially when the RET issue is finally resolved. Varies dramatically by state, and again there's been peaks and troughs and driven by all sorts of factors. And this is where it gets really interesting actually, because as we've done our forecast for the last couple of years, in fact about 3 years ago for the first time when we were doing our forecast, we went, wow, if we look at history and we look at the economics and we look at where the market factors are at, we can expect these markets to keep growing, and we kept driving the growth into those markets and expecting cost reductions and various other things to happen. And we thought, gee, I wonder what the penetration rate on the rooftop is like, and we suddenly realised that we'd gone over 100%. And so we actually had to start winding our forecast back. And each year now, when we look at the growth rate, and what we would normally expect each market to do, we actually have to pull more and more back because there simply aren't the rooftops available to get it. Despite that, we still expect growth, particularly in Queensland and New South Wales and South Australia, but it is getting harder and harder when we're really looking into the future. We're seeing different markets and different things that will drive those markets. Looking specifically at commercial, this gives you a bit of a breakdown of where we think that'll be. This is an interesting one because, you know, when we do our forecast, we've got a super model that we use behind the scenes to actually drive the economics. We call it the Jennifer Hawkins. And the super model basically allows us to input all the variables that we have in terms of rebates and prices and incentives and electricity prices and PV prices and margins and various other things, and it spits out an economic proposition. And then what we can do is compare that to how the market reacted historically when the proposition was similar. So we can kind of benchmark against history and do a few other things and then say, well, going forward, what do we think the market will do? And then we layer over the top of that a whole heap of other factors that will influence uptake. In commercial, as one example, we always assumed that the small businesses would be the main place to take solar up because they're paying the highest price for electricity. Right, a typical, small unit, in Queensland, I've visited numerous ones. They're paying 32, 35 cents a kilowatt hour flat throughout the day, every day. Right, so PV can generate electricity for around 8, 9 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's a no-brainer, right, for a small business. So we logically assumed that would be where the sweet spot was. But of course, the market actually turned that on its head, and what they said was, well, sure, but we can actually get some better economy of scale if we go up to 50, 60, 70 kilowatts, which is pushing into larger businesses. So the market was actually much stronger in the 30 to 100 kilowatt space than we expected it to be. And so we've now adjusted our forecast and see that continuing in the future. Going back to the saturation piece, this is some data actually from Green Energy Markets, which shows the saturation level up to 2016 in the different states. And this is quite remarkable. There is nowhere else in the world where you will find 40 or 50% of the roofs covered in solar. It's taken us a long time to get there. Some of us have gone grey, quite a few of us have gone grey in the years that it took us to get there. But nonetheless, we're there, and we have this remarkable situation now where 40, 50% of the roofs, in fact, there are, last time I checked, there was about 2 or 3 dozen postcodes that were in excess of 50% of rooftops with solar on. These are freestanding, owner-occupied rooftops, by the way, which makes up about 40, almost 50% of all the roofs available. So there's still a big, another market out there. There's units and rental properties. Although we're even penetrating into there. Someone actually gave me some data the other day and showed that they now reckon we're at about 1% of the rentals in Australia actually have solar on them, incredibly. So we're pushing into all sorts of spaces, and this makes the market really, really interesting, because when you get past 50%, and again, that same conversation, we'd always been hypothesising, what is that saturation rate where the market just stops? Is it 50%? Is it 70%? Is it 90%? When does the market actually, hit up against that wall? And most people I talk to agree that it's about 60% when life gets really difficult. It's pretty hard trying to convince climate skeptics to put a solar system on their roof, for example. And yet here we are faced with that prospect in the very near future. When you look at it by postcode, that's what it looks like. So this is saturation. The darker the colour, the higher saturation. This is a little bit deceptive, because in some of those places there aren't very many people, of course, especially out in the west there. But where you can see in South Australia particularly, and up the east coast around Brisbane, that's where the uptake has been extraordinarily high for a variety of reasons. So let's have a look at price for a second. Why has this happened? And here's the answer. This is what's happened with price. And in fact, in 2015, the lowest price I've seen recently was about, for a 5 kilowatt system, you could get it installed for about $3,000. So, that's about 60 cents a watt installed, done, which is absolutely extraordinary. In fact, unrealistic, I'd suggest. But nonetheless, it's out there if you want it. Most people hover around $1.20, $1.30 a watt installed, so that's still a fairly typical price. And in fact, the foreign exchange has really challenged us. But that's price versus volume. Although we certainly have an impact, and we've been the 8th biggest market in the world for PV in years gone by. So we've consumed, when we hit a gigawatt in a year, that made us the 8th biggest market in the world, which is a wonderful, wonderful result. But we're still not really influential on what happens in the world of PV. We don't, hugely influence the decisions of the manufacturers right upstream to make big investments. We're certainly a part of it, but it would certainly be deceptive of us to think that we've helped drive the price down to a large degree. Perhaps some of the people in this room have, through your great technology work, but not so much the market, although we do have a bit of an impact and certainly have steered things to some degree. When you look at it over the shorter term, I'm going to have to put my glasses on to see what I'm showing you here. This is a moving average in the Australian dollars per watt, showing the difference in the years and versus the volume. So, there's not a direct correlation between the price that we see and the volume that the market's absorbing. There are just a myriad of other variables that actually affect these things. It's kind of correlates a little bit, but it just gives you an example in the near term of what's happened. When you look at where the price is and where it was, this gives you a bit of an indication of the breakdown. Some of this data is extrapolated. Most of it actually comes from surveys that have done of installers and collecting data from what's going on in the market. So it's a reasonable indication of the price build-up. You can see, by the way, I'll bang on for the whole hour, right? No problem at all. If you've got questions, you want to ask me anything as we're going, just sing out. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking for the whole time. So this gives you a bit of an idea. And the interesting one here is that PV was always the huge focus of attention, but look where it is now. It's still the largest single component of the price build-up of a solar system, but it is by no means, where the big focus of attention is now, because it's become, somewhat marginal compared to the other components. And in fact, there's a challenge now between driving the price lower and maintaining the quality of PV modules, which is a real challenge in the market. The other thing that's interesting to note here is this piece here, and that's the profit. There are certainly amongst those 3,000 or 4,000 companies that are out there, there are some people who've made a lot of money. There are some people who've lost a lot of money. Last time I counted, I could probably account pretty quickly for 300 or 400 solar businesses that have come into the market and either gone bankrupt or collapsed or exited or various other things. So it is tough out there. It is very, very tough. And especially for businesses who've gone through this extraordinary growth. They grow to 200 or 300 or 400 people, and then they contract back to 100 or 50 or 20 people, and they're still trying to do almost the same amount of work with vastly smaller crews and vastly smaller numbers. Their efficiencies of scale go out of the window, but of course the price expectations in the market remain the same. Consumers expect the price to keep going down. They expect it to hover around $1 a watt. And for a company who was doing a megawatt a few years ago, they might have turned over, let me think about this. 5 years ago, the average retail price was about $10,000 to $15,000 for a typical solar system. Today, that is worth about $3,000 or $4,000. So you're doing the same amount of work, but you're getting about a third of the money for the work. Right. So in terms of the revenue and the profit that these companies are getting in, it is extremely challenging. So there's a lot of tension in the market at the moment, and they either have to find new ways to make extra revenue, or they need to lift their margins, or else they're simply not going to survive, which is why we're seeing the huge pressure that we've got out there. So it's a very, very dynamic market. In terms of volume versus price, I think I've touched on all of this. Out of interest, there's a real challenge around the quality of products that come into Australia. When we opened our arms to the world and said we'll take anything as long as it's cheap, and a lot of people who jumped into the market thought that a PV panel was a PV panel was a PV panel, and it didn't make any difference. We have about 400 brands of solar panels in the Australian market. That's more brands than anyone else in the world. And if you list every model number that's in that list on the Clean Energy Council's approved product list, there's more than 20,000 individual solar panels listed for our market. It's surreal. And the sad part is it took the market quite a while, and when I say the market, I mean both consumers and I mean the importers of these products. It took them quite a while to realise that there really is a genuine difference between a good quality panel that's going to last the distance and bad or poorer quality products. And you can see that represented here in the switch from Tier 3 to Tier 1 type products. So we had the biggest market in the world for the cheapest, lowest end solar panels. So we have a lot of low quality solar panels on roofs out there. The majority may well just be fine. We'll keep our fingers crossed. There are certainly statistically very, very low numbers of failures so far, which is terrific. I hope that continues, but I have a sense that it's probably going to grow over time. We're certainly starting to see it. So we've got some challenges to face there. In terms of the regulatory market, in a nutshell, we've basically only got one support scheme left now that makes a difference to PV, either in the residential, commercial or industrial space, and that's the Renewable Energy Target. It's broken up into two parts, the SRES, the small scale scheme, and the LRET, the large scale scheme. The SRES scheme's from 0 to 100 kilowatts, and that's the main driver in the residential sector. It obviously works up to fairly decent sized 100 kilowatt systems as well. It looks like the SRES is going to go through unscathed pretty much, and it's going to remain pretty much untouched. We're just waiting for the legislation to get through the upper house, which will happen in the next couple of weeks, but by all accounts it's going to get through. Which is great news for the small residential and small commercial markets. The large-scale program has taken a haircut. It's been clipped. And I don't know if anyone saw The Guardian today, but there was an interesting article where, quoting the Prime Minister this morning on Alan Jones' radio show, who pretty much said, you know, we're very disappointed that we didn't manage to really wind this sector back. That was pretty much what he said. Their aim was that they wanted to reduce particularly large-scale wind and the sector in general, and he's now admitted that to all of Alan Jones's listeners, who we don't care about really. Retail and tariffs. This is the tricky bit, and I was chatting before we came in about where the tensions are. So, you know, not only have we got tension in terms of deploying solar into the marketplace because of penetration rates and you know, government attitude towards solar, and for what it's worth, you know, we've actually measured this in the last 2 decades. I've tracked the market in all the different roles I've done, and one thing that you can always see quite clearly is that when our leaders come out and say solar is a good thing, solar helps Australia, solar is good for the environment, solar is good for your back pocket, the market responds every single time. Every single time there are positive statements flowing out, the market responds. Conversely, when we had a huge stink in New South Wales about the 60-cent tariff, and the solar industry took on the new government who'd come in, who tried to wind it back, and the government flipped it on its head and attacked the solar industry and said, you know, solar will eat your baby and it'll burn your house down, it'll do all sorts of terrible things, and consumers ran away. It took them quite a while to come back. So consumers are very fickle, and they actually do respond to these kind of motherhood statements by our leaders, which is why I get so annoyed. We've heard the Prime Minister, and, you know, God bless him, he's a public servant, he's the Prime Minister, he's working hard, and, you know, good on him. But, you know, it's annoying when he lies, and he lies a fair bit when it comes to renewables, frankly. Well, it's true, sadly. I've written letters to him personally and said, can you please stop lying about the RET and saying it's the major reason why electricity prices are going up. It's not. And you know, some of this data is a good example. And what's happening, of course, is that as solar has exploded to become significant, and with about 4 gigawatts of solar installed in Australia now, in a total generation mark of about 45 gigawatts, we're a chunk of generation, right? So on a big Australian sunny day, there's up to 4 gigawatts potentially available around the country, which is really eroding the revenues and the profitability of the entire utility sector, whether it's generation, whether it's the spot market price that they can get when energy prices peak and surge because of demand, which they don't anymore because of solar, or whether it's the network guys who rely on making a clip for sending energy down the lines, which they're not getting anymore because solar's compressing demand. There's all sorts of factors happening. And one network company executive told me late last year when I was doing a presentation with him that they'd calculated it was costing them about $200 million a year in lost revenue. That's one network company. So you can pretty quickly do a sum and go, that's about $1 billion a year in lost revenues. So it's no wonder they're jacking up. And they can do all sorts of interesting things. This is an example of how they're increasing the standing rates, the flat rates that you can't affect with solar generation. So what they're doing is reducing the cost of energy and increasing the daily charges, which solar can't offset, to try and protect their revenue stream. And we're seeing some horrendously biased and terribly transparent manoeuvres on their part to try and protect their revenue streams. I understand why they would do it. It'd be nice if they were being creative instead of just blocking, but that's currently what we're seeing, is lots of blocking. I'll dive in and keep going here. So we've seen a slow transition towards quality. There's been some interesting press, and in fact I had a couple of calls yesterday after publishing a story about some of the challenges that we've got in quality in installations, particularly around DC isolators on roofs. So, you know, there may be some more press around this, but, you know, there are very genuine fears from a lot of people that we really need to drive quality harder, and to not only convince consumers that they should look for high quality panels, but also to work on the market, the suppliers and people in the value chain. I've mentioned this one, so I'm going to skip through that. Some more samples of price. This shows you the transition in different tiers of pricing over time. So, you know, down, 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 down. Conversely, you know, this is our price compared to international indexes for PV price, and compared on a monthly foreign exchange rate. And so what you can see is the real price in Australia has actually gone up. Of course, we've had a significant shift. We were down at high 60s, low 70s for the foreign exchange rate about 6-9 months ago now, and now we're around the dollar mark. So that's got to have an impact given how much is imported. So again, when you look at the economics of the industry and the profitability of the industry, it's actually been eroded for some time now. In terms of products and services and what else is happening out there, servicing is a really interesting one. I grabbed this one off the net this morning, give you just one example of what's happening. And a lot of people now are out there doing service work and going back and actually fixing the problems, either from poor quality products or simply from consumers who've had solar on their roofs for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years and they're now needing some maintenance. There was no incentive to build in the cost of maintenance or maintenance agreements into solar. Everyone said, no, it's fine, slap it on the roof, it'll be fine, 25-year warranty. But of course that isn't the reality. Things do need cleaning, they need checking, and they need servicing, let alone if you've got older systems that were built using poor quality gear. So there's quite a burgeoning market now, and pretty much every solar installer in the country has some type of service offer. It's something that's going to increase over time, I'm sure. We've seen that happening. And interesting, when you look at the finance market and financing of solar's starting to grow slowly but surely in Australia, this maintenance and service and after-sales service and staying connected to the customer is not only a critical part of assuring the revenue and making sure that solar system continues to work reliably and delivers financial returns that the customer's expecting, but it's also a new revenue stream for solar companies to be able to do that work. So servicing's an interesting new part of the market that's really emerging. Data and control is something that I actually obsess over because the more I try to connect the dots on everything that's going on in the industry, the more I realise that it is increasingly about ones and zeros. The only tangible, I always say this, but the only tangible thing you really get as a consumer of a solar energy system is a 1 or a 0. You can convert that into dollars if you're selling your energy, or you can convert it into savings if you're offsetting energy, but none of that happens unless you send a widget of something out and offset a widget of something else. So it's all about the data flow, right? That's what actually makes the whole thing tangible. There are a lot of different ways to skin that cat, but it's all about data. And the more sophisticated our market gets and the more complex the product offers get, the more important data becomes. I've worked with a lot of companies on PPA products over the last couple of years, for example, and data is intrinsic to that. When a company sells a PPA solution to a customer, they are obliged to deliver that energy to the customer to get the return on the system. So the customer expects it, so he gets his saving, and the investor who's put that solar system on their roof needs the system to be working perfectly, and they need to know it's working perfectly, and if it's not working perfectly, they need to know that and get it fixed very, very quickly, or else they're losing revenue and the whole deal falls over. This little map, and it's a little hard to read, I apologise, but in the core is data management, and all those bits around the edge are all the different ways and different segments of the data space that we've currently got in operation. I've actually got most of those, believe it or not, in my home. I've got 6 monitoring systems in my home. People send me stuff and I play with it and let the kids try and break it and do all sorts of interesting things. And it's fascinating to see how this market is evolving. Historically, all the inverter manufacturers had the solutions. So you bought an inverter and they had a data logging system and you hung it off the back and you could see what your solar system did. That was cool for a little while, and then you got bored and you never looked at it again. Then it went on and it got a bit more sophisticated, and we've seen some great work from former students of this school in developing products that actually allow you to do more advanced analytical stuff and actually predict when something's going wrong. Or you can go another step and you can actually say, well, if you're a retailer and you've put 10,000 solar systems out there, wouldn't you like to have a map that shows exactly what everyone's doing and actually dial up a maintenance person automatically if something's below par? Right? And so you're seeing those kinds of tools starting to emerge now. And it's not going to be long before, of course, we move into load control as well. And in fact, I've got some basic load control stuff on my house. Mine are consumer devices that plug into a power point that I can hop on my iPhone and I can dial up any one of 6 different load controllers in my house and switch things on and off. I can monitor them. I can annoy my wife. I can in fact see what she's cooking. I can see what she's cooking by the load profile on the shape of the data. So it's very cool. I know when she's got the slow cooker on. So there are all sorts of interesting things you can get, but of course it's all bits and pieces, right? There isn't no one yet, and I wrote this in a blog the other day, there is no one in the world yet who can seamlessly and simply solve all of these potential opportunities for doing clever things with this data and put it into one sweet package that means an idiot like me can use it on a smartphone. It doesn't exist yet. There are lots of bits and pieces and lots of niche applications, but there's still a huge amount of opportunity. Of course, the other piece of this puzzle that's really going to make it interesting is batteries. And when energy storage really gets going, it's already rolling, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but when it really gets rolling, we're going to see some amazing things happening, and the requirements for data are going to go through the roof. Because I can tell you one thing, having sold storage systems and battery systems for many, many years, you want to know what's going on in that house if you want to have make that battery last 10 or 15 years. You need to control things. Every one of the new lithium-ion battery systems has a battery management system on it. It has cut-off points. You'll have tariff export regimes that are built in. You'll have load shedding regimes that are built in. Hopefully it'll all be connected to smart devices in the home. And so being able to access all of that becomes really critical if you're going to maintain that system or troubleshoot it when something goes wrong. Right? And there's one other thing that we absolutely know. If we go back 10 slides to the utility piece, what are they going to do? They're going to change the rules on us. Right? In 6 months' time, then again in 12 months' time, like clockwork, they will game us at every opportunity to try and protect their interests. That's the way the business world works. So what do we know? We know that the tariff structure that I'm on today is going to be different in 6 or 12 months' time, or a new deal will come out, or a new option will come out. And if you've invested $500, $1,000, $2,000 in an energy storage system with solar and load control and all those kinds of things, you don't want to have to go back out there and reprogram the whole system. What you want to be able to do is press a button and send a piece of data down the line to solve it. Right? And that's in fact starting to happen around the world now. So data and control, very, very important. Storage, really interesting. Really, really interesting. We're a bit like the canary in the coal mine for storage. Australia has everything that you would want in a storage market except hundreds of millions of people. So it makes us a really nice little pilot market for pretty much everyone in the world. And when you look at the number of storage products, I did a survey in December 2014. I could find 34 different brands and companies doing energy storage packages already. Made up a list of about 250 different individual product packages, and I know there's about another 100 that have come onto the market since then, let alone, of course, Tesla, who've made a whole lot of hype and really generated a lot of noise without actually having anything yet. But that's good for everyone. So we have all the right characteristics for an organic storage market to work. We don't have the subsidies. It'll go ballistic if we get subsidies. But even in their absence, the economics are starting to become right. They're right enough for early adopters. And for what it's worth, a couple of years ago, there was about 100 grid support energy storage systems sold in Australia. In the last year, I can count around 1,000, and my forecast for the next year is 14,000. So we're going to go from 100 to 1,000 to 14,000 energy storage systems installed in Australia in 2 or 3 years. Absolutely astounding. It is clearly the next big wave. The good part about it is every manufacturer in the world is pretty much represented here. There are a suite of fantastic products and technologies out there. I wrote a big piece about the energy storage conference that was on recently if you want to dig into it more. But is this realistic? Can we expect 14,000? Well, interestingly, in the US they did a study recently which said about 9% of systems will have storage by 2018. So there you go, there's a benchmark for us to work on. My 14,000 is about 5%, to put it in context. And we're ahead of the curve because we've got the right economics. And we've also got this desperation. Every solar installer in the country desperately wants to sell storage because it's a new revenue stream, right? It's a higher value per kilowatt hour. So for them, it's a way to survive and make money and keep the solar costs low. And if you smear them together, it makes sense. So I think it's quite realistic. And in fact, everyone I talk to says the same thing. However, it is an early adopter product right now. It doesn't work in every situation. The economics are very, very challenging. You know, when we surveyed the market and looked at what the costs were, you know, we're talking about, you know, a consumer having to spend $10,000 plus, a payback typically in excess of 10 years, return on investment that doesn't look great. But ironically, I was quoted in the Australian Financial Review today, believe it or not, and the one quote that this journalist grabbed out of an hour-long conversation was that we know consumers don't give a shit about economic rationalism. That was the only thing that they grabbed. But it's dead true, right? 5 years ago, consumers bought $10,000 solar systems and it didn't make financial sense, and tens of thousands of them did it. And there's very little reason to think that the same type of attitude won't prevail in storage. It's entirely probable. So the economics are kind of getting close. For someone like me, I'm on time of use, so I pay 12, 13 cents in off-peak, about 17 on shoulder, and 52 on peak. So for me to try and shed my 2 till 8 p.m. peak, I only have to get energy at less than 52 cents a kilowatt hour, and it stacks up for me. And I can go out today and buy a storage system that will give me the energy I need between 2 and 8, and it'll work. So there are some situations. Now, you know, I'm not the typical consumer, I admit, but it's quite feasible. Been a number of studies done. This one was released late last year. UBS did some numbers. They had a look, and you know what they really looked at was 3 or 4 packages they found in the market and said, you know, what are the costs and where are the opportunities for cost reduction and how we're actually going to get this technology down in price. Interestingly, the price in the 3 or 4 months since this study was released already come down by about 20 or 30%. So we're already seeing a lot of the cost reductions. The major finding in this was that integrated, fully architectured, electronically architectured solar energy storage systems are really what is going to be the long-term result. Buying bits and pieces, a solar system from here, and an inverter from there, and an inverter charger from there, and a battery from Tesla, and you know, some cable from the guy down the road, and a communication system from somewhere else, and trying to marry all that together and get it to work seamlessly for the next 10 or 15 years is a big challenge. At the other end of the scale, if you buy a box that is a fully integrated solution that has everything that you need, is designed to work together and can integrate and has inbuilt architecture that means that it all talks together successfully and can be upgraded and adapted as time goes by, is an infinitely more elegant solution. You pay a premium for that, of course, but that's the way it goes. In terms of looking at the prices on storage, this is a sample of real battery prices. You can see on this graph both the nominal and the available capacity. And this is one of the challenges we've got in batteries is, you know, people come out and say you can have my 20 kilowatt hour battery pack, but of course you can't actually use that whole 20 kilowatt hours. The available capacity is really what's usable to you. So we've differentiated them in our sample. You can see some examples of where the prices are at. But of course, this is just the price per kilowatt hour. And it's a good indication. It's what is the beginning of the economic equation, but it's far from the whole story. It's a long way from the whole story. And I've been encouraging everyone to look way beyond just the price per kilowatt hour of either nominal or available, because it doesn't tell the whole story. The second part, a little bit more advanced, is to go into the raw energy costs. So then you say, what's the capital cost? How long should it last? How deeply can I discharge it? How much energy can I put through it? And you get the price per kilowatt hour over its life. Okay, so that's a better indication. It gives you a nominal energy cost, and as you can see here, you know, we've got a huge range, but we've got some down in this range here. You know, this is around 25 cents a kilowatt hour. That's good, right? That's good. That's economic. That you can make it work like that. But what the raw energy cost fails to take into account is the vagaries of the way that people use energy and the vagaries of solar. So that's where we did some more work and we developed another model which is kind of closer to levelized cost of energy called the relative cost of energy. Developed this with this model, well, this is the output of the model. And effectively what we've done here is we've taken real consumption data, and we can vary it from different segments. We've taken real solar generation data, and we can overlay the two together. We then input a whole lot of variables, and we've actually got about a dozen different variables that you can tweak. What that gives you is not only the performance characteristics of the energy storage system and the performance characteristics of the solar system, but it also gives you the interrelationship between when that energy is needed in the home, what price they're paying at that time, how much they're generating on a typical day, and how deeply they're having to work that battery. Okay, and so it really is the kind of the real world model of what is going to happen, and that's what we tried to do in this example. So that relative cost of energy gives you a better indication, still imperfect, but gives you a better indication. You can see the prices there in relative terms start to again look very, very good. Now it's important to notice that the battery system only, in most of these cases, the payback is 29 years, 36 years, 30 years, 37, 41 years. So a battery system on its own in this particular case was a long way from economic. What makes it economic is the delivery of very, very low cost energy from a solar system into that battery. Okay? You need the solar to make the storage work. There will be some exceptions to that rule, of course, but the net result of all of that is if you combine them together, you get some numbers here in terms of relative cost of energy that are extremely good. Extremely, extremely good. So we're getting close. We're getting very, very close. However, it's very sensitive, of course. This is one package, and what we did was played with a whole lot of variables. So we said, okay, nominally we were comparing 10 kilowatt hour packages. What if we double the size of that package? Does that help the economics? What if we halve the size of the package? Does that help the economics? What if we double the size of the solar or halve the size of the solar? What if we take a consumer from a flat rate to a time of use rate? There are a whole lot of variables that you can play with that really impact on how the economics end up. And this is one example of one product just changing those sensitivities. So it is extremely sensitive to those input variables. And this is one of the big challenges that our market has in selling solar, because Mrs. Jones sitting on the couch says, does it make sense? Just tell me if it makes sense. Tell me how I'll pay for it. Tell me how big it will be. Make me feel confident that it won't blow up and burn my house down. Tell me how you're going to service it. Does it need servicing, and so on. So we have to take a whole lot of really complex things and really funnel them down into some very, very simple sales propositions for consumers. That's one of the biggest challenges the industry has right now, is how do we take this complex set of potential variables and funnel them right down. And of course, just like we know there are some things that are certain in life, taxes, utilities going to try and screw us over as time goes by. The other thing that we know is that consumers' load behaviour changes. Their kids grow up, or they leave home, or they have new kids. Trees grow and shade things, right? Temperature variations change. Things change, right? They change. It's absolutely inevitable. So even if you could model the perfect model of what you think an energy storage and solar system will do, hypothetically speaking, it's only hypothetical because we know everything's going to change. So this is where adaptability becomes so crucial. The other piece, this is where my life gets more interesting, because I'm on my second electric motorbike already. My last petrol bike's for sale, and it dawned on me recently. I've ridden motorcycles all my life and really, really enjoy them, and I'm utterly smitten with my electric bike, especially my 2014 model. It's the best motorcycle I've ever owned as a motorcycle, let alone the fact that it cost me $1.50 to fill up. Used about, what did I use to get over here today from the northern beaches? I used about 600 watt hours of energy to come here today. I've got solar on my home that I can recharge it with. I've got a storage system going in next month that will store my daily energy up so I can dump it into the bike at night, and I can buy green power and 100% renewables to recharge it. So it's 100% green. And what's getting really interesting is I've got a 12 kilowatt hour battery bank in that bike. That's enough to run my house, right? An energy efficient house without any problem at all. If you just want to do peak load shedding, in my case, I need about 4 or 5 kilowatt hours. That's it. So I can actually commute on my bike and load shed and still have energy left over in the capacity I've got in this bike, right? And it's a $23,000 bike. So it's an expensive bike. It's about 30 or 40% more than you pay for a comparable bike. But as a home energy storage system and a bike, it's a bargain. The economics smear over really, really nicely. The technology to go from vehicle to grid, or V to G, is coming. It is extraordinarily close. In fact, there's a customer of mine who's bought a bike. He's got 12 kilowatts of PV on his roof and 4 EVs, 2 electric motorcycles, one of them sitting in his shed, and it sits in his shed quite a lot because he uses it for racing almost exclusively. So it's sitting there. He's got this 12 kilowatt hour battery just sitting there in a bike. And an Australian company has actually developed an inverter that'll do 100 to 400 volts DC and will interact with that bike and suck the energy out and then spit it into the home as it's needed, depending on what's going on with the solar. So this is all very cool, but as you can see, it's getting pretty complicated. There's a lot of decisions being made here, right? Do we switch loads on or off? Do we switch the charger for the bike on or off? How much solar have we got coming in? What's the price of electricity? What's the weather doing now? What was it doing an hour ago? And what's it going to be doing in 2 or 3 hours, right? All of that stuff is ones and zeros. It's just ones and zeros. Collect it, aggregate it, control it, smarten it, and I just want it on an app that says you should do this, right? We've switched your washing machine on because we can see that it makes sense for you now. We've turned your bike charger off because we think the sun's going to come out in 3 hours because we're monitoring a weather station and it says the sun will be out in your place in 3 hours, right? Those are the kinds of decisions that will just happen in the background. I don't need to know about them, I just need to know they work. So V2G will come. It'll just be a segment of the energy storage market, and for what it's worth, the energy storage market, it has at least 12 segments. V2G is one of them. It won't be the only one by any means, but it's the funnest one because you get to go riding on the weekend. Finance is the other bit that's really interesting. About 70% of all sales in the US are financed. Australia, we are less than 10% financed, and sadly, the majority of our finance is sort of akin to all the tier 3 solar panels that we've got. It's pretty crap, right? It's a point of sale product that's very expensive and actually doesn't really protect the consumer very well, but that is changing over time. There are some smarter finance products coming, and PPAs are now starting to appear in Australia. For what it's worth, lots of people talk about PPAs, and I've been one of them, and the hope is that it's such a simple proposition, a PPA. When you walk into someone's home, and I've actually met consumers who've signed up for PPAs,
Can I just say that's a power purchase agreement?
Power purchase agreement, yeah, sorry. Right. I met a 82-year-old man who signed up to a power purchase agreement for solar. So instead of paying $5,000 to put a solar system on his roof and then having to own it, insure it, theoretically maintain it, fix it if it goes wrong, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do, someone knocked on his door and said, "Hey mate, would you like to buy electricity for 12 cents a kilowatt hour?" And he said, "Sure. Why wouldn't anyone want to do that?" And they said, "We're just going to come and slap a solar system on your roof. We'll send you a bill for 12 cents a kilowatt hour for the next 10 years. Is that cool?" And he said, "Sure." He's in, right? Simple as that. So the simplest sales proposition you could think of, which is why it's so popular in many, many countries around the world, hasn't worked here so well yet. For what it's worth in terms of context, everyone I'm talking to, we get a number, we reckon there's maybe been about 500 solar PPAs sold in the last year. So there's more energy storage systems being sold already than solar PPAs. That's a sign of how advanced our market is. We just love technology, right? What we don't love is things that sound too good to be true, right? And that's why PPAs aren't growing here. You talk to consumers and they go, "What's the catch, mate? Solar for 11 cents a kilowatt hour? Really? Come on." Right? That's what they say. And they dig and they dig and they dig and they say, what's the interest rate that I'm paying? You know, who am I on the hook to? What if something goes wrong? What if you go bust? Blah, blah, blah. If I buy it and own it, it's like my house. I bought that and now I own it because I've owned it for 20 years, right? We like owning stuff. We don't necessarily like the idea of putting all our faith in someone else and having them own it. But it's changing rapidly, and I think it will definitely grow. There's a load of different financial products. That's the basic proposition. You know, you make a payment for solar, either through a lease or through a PPA or some other program, and you get a flat rate over time, effectively. That's the simple proposition. But one of the really interesting things, and I'm almost out of time, but one of the really interesting things that everyone asks me is they say, well, how, you know, surely a PPA is no good because you're paying more, you're paying a higher rate, and that is true. This is indicative rates and terms, and they start at 0% if you use your own cash and go up to nominally about 15 to 20% of typical interest payments on PPAs. The terms go from 0 years effectively to, you know, as much as 15 or 25 years, depending on whether you're putting on a home loan or whether you're putting on a PPA or something else. And what everyone says to me is, well, one of these products must be the best, right? Which one's the best product for me? Or which one is the best product, full stop, not for me, but just which one is the best product. And the short answer is different people have different requirements, right? If you've got cash and you're not trying to make a return on it, or you couldn't use it for something else and you've got enough cash to buy yourself a system, go for your life. If you've got headroom on your mortgage and you don't mind paying a small interest rate over a long period of time for your solar and you want to roll it into your mortgage, go right ahead, right? If you've got scope there, and that works for you economically, fine. However, if you don't want to own it, you don't want to maintain it, you don't want to care about it, all you want is the output, and you want someone to do everything for you, then a PPA is the best product for you, right? So none of these products is individually better or worse than the other. They all simply have different applications in the market. And that's what our market hasn't really done yet, is it hasn't explained. We've all been so busy, everyone's been so busy competing with each other, saying my product's better than that product, so don't do a PPA, do a lease. Or you should just pay cash, or I'll finance it for 2 years interest-free, which isn't really interest-free. So, you know, that's the way the market's been approaching it. And I think quickly what everyone will start doing, and we're starting to see it already, is people saying, I've got a variety of options for you, tell me which one suits you, right? The prodigal son. This is pretty typical of our Prime Minister and a lot of journalists, you know. Solar will eat your baby. Is it the problem? No, it's not the problem. Here you go. 92% of your bill is made up of a whole heap of things other than solar. It's mostly network charges, as everyone knows. It does have a cost. The cost of the RET and feed-in tariffs and all those types of things have a cost. However, when you look across our community and across society about cross-subsidies, there are cross-subsidies everywhere. Fossil fuel gets about 7.7. In fact, it's gone up now. I think it's about $10 billion a year in subsidies. Water is cross-subsidised. Sewerage is cross-subsidised. Things are cross-subsidised all over the place. That's the way the country works and the economy works. So this argument about it being unfair because it's subsidised, I think is a crock. There are cross-subsidies everywhere. Does it have a cost to society? The Grattan Institute came out with a report that made a fair bit of press in the last few weeks. They calculated that there was a $10 billion cost to society for the renewable energy target on its own, and that it was a gross waste of money and high cost and all those kinds of things. It's already been shredded and pulled apart. The latest analysis, which was published up on Renew Economy the other day, showed that rather than a 9.7, nearly $10 billion cost, it actually had about a $1.2 billion net benefit to the society. So, you know, we'll continue to have these arguments depending on whether you favour the values or whether you, and benefits, or whether you favour the costs and the negative implications. So it's, you know, it's a difficult debate. This is the challenge that we're facing. This is a feeder. So this is load. The blue is load, and the blue is solar output. And what you can see is the transition over time. So these different lines working their way down basically show this particular feeder in North Queensland. You know, load used to just go like this through the day. It used to just go up, 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 up. And, you know, they were happy. They were selling kilowatt hours. They were taking a clip on the way through. As more and more and more and more solar went on that line, the load reduced, and then it went negative to the point where now all they see is negative load for the vast majority of the solar day on this particular feeder. And it's been getting worse, deeper and deeper and deeper. So they've got, in Energex's area, they've got about 30 substations where energy actually flows backwards on any given sunny day for the majority of the day because there's so much solar just pumping energy out. They literally, I got taken into the control room in Energix and they literally said, check this out, we can't believe it, look at it, it's going backwards, it makes no sense. And they were just standing there just going, this isn't right. Solar reduces costs. So there's a lot of arguments, does solar compress the wholesale price of energy? I always defer to the ESAA because the ESAA, the Electricity Supply Association of Australia, said it does. So don't take it from a solar guy, take it from the Energy Supply Association of Australia, who admit that it's compressed the price of electricity and in the wholesale market. Now that doesn't get passed through because of intricacies in our market, but it is compressing prices. So what's the problem? The problem is it's change. People with beards like mine that are greying and fuddy-duddy old guys don't like change, and a lot of the network and utility guys particularly have been doing things a certain way for a long time, and God bless them, they've kept the lights on. My great granddad's buried out in Broken Hill. He was a coal miner, so they've done a great job of getting us to where we are, but it's time to move on. And there's a lot of change going on, and you can see some of the issues. So we're really disrupting them. Some new data that came out today. This was published again on, I think it was Climate Spectator, this one. This puts it in context for you. 60% of the EU generators, the utilities, have lost 100 billion euros worth of value in the last 5 years or so because of what's going on. Same kind of issue, renewables coming into the market and taking away conventional generation. $100 billion, that's big. I mentioned in Australia it's about $1 billion, hundreds of millions and growing. This is like the death spiral live in 3D for you, right? It shows the compression of value in those companies. So, I'm 2 minutes over, so I'm going to go really quick. What does it mean? PV's great. Saturation's a big challenge for us, and it's getting hard to sell, especially to climate skeptics. Storage, it's a niche market, but we know it's going to grow. We can absolutely look back on history, we can look at the economics, we can look at the market conditions, and God bless Elon Musk, we can look at the hype. And that is going to drive the market for some time. Utilities are really in a difficult space. They're going to have to adapt or perish. And it makes sense for us to work together. It's pretty hard though at the moment because we're cutting their lunch, so they're not really wanting to play. And this is all very new, and of course Australia's got its own unique set of dynamics, so no one really knows what the exact answer is. There are lots of great models and studies and hypotheticals, but we're kind of working it out as we go, so it is challenging. Costs and benefits are going to keep being debated, and for me, in my mind, data and smart control is absolutely the go. Whew. That's an hour worth of me banging on. I hope there was something helpful and useful in there for you. It gives you a pretty quick snapshot of what's going on. Thanks very much for coming today.
Thank you, Nigel. It was great. Any questions?
Nigel, thanks very much. Very interesting and enthusiastic as always. With the storage solutions that are being offered, particularly the domestic storage solutions, particularly domestic for business as well, how clever is the software that comes with that? It seems there's lots of opportunities to do some very clever things, but I don't know whether they're being done or whether they should be done. So looking at weather forecasts and dealing with whether it's weekend or holiday time.
I agree. I don't see a lot of smarts yet. Certainly if you go right up to the very high-end stuff, it's there in the Bosch and the SMAs and packages like that. It's there, but the price is unacceptable at the moment. And even then, it is complicated because it's so new. I spoke to someone the other day who's installed 3 of their fully smart home systems, and the time taken to connect everything together in the house is complicated, and the European products that it's supposed to match with don't really work in Australia, and so it is very complex, and we've got a lot of work to do. But I honestly, it's ones and zeros, as I've said over and over and over again. All it takes is the right smart brain. Probably one of the kids from the uni or someone else like that to actually sit down and look at all the combinations and permutations of what needs to be done. And I think we need an agnostic device that can just talk to everything. And there's a few smart Aussie companies trying to get that right, but they've picked off pieces of the market, which is pretty typical because we're still emerging. No one really knows what it is. So there's a ton of room for improvement.
Nigel, thanks for a very interesting presentation.
You're welcome.
Quick question about the PPA. The PPA is a very powerful financing instrument.
Yes.
But there's a lot of regulatory hurdles to the PPA, as I understand it. Like you need to be a retailer before you can actually offer PPAs to people. I may be wrong. Have you got any view on that regulatory side of it easing over time?
Yeah. Actually, it is staggeringly easy. You don't need to have a retail licence in Australia. We've successfully, incredibly, lobbied the regulatory bodies to allow us to get an exemption. So you can apply to the Australian Energy Regulator and get an exemption. It's a matter of filling out a form, putting in a pretty simple business plan, and you will get an exemption. That exemption has no end date, so it's in perpetuity. And it costs virtually nothing. So consequently, there are about 50 or last count 60 something companies in Australia who've got exemptions approved to sell solar PPAs. Having said that, there are probably only about 5 or 10 companies who are actually active with it. The hard bit is not getting the exemption or complying with the requirements of that, and they recognise that it's very early days with maybe 500 systems out there. There's no point having a huge regulatory program around it. So they've been very flexible. It's great. It's one of the rare examples. The really hard part is all the background work to line all the pieces of the puzzle up if you want to do the PPAs yourself. There are a bunch, in fact, I've had a number of people ask me, I think it's about $100,000 legal exercise to get the agreements in place. It's probably 6 to 12 months worth of work. And negotiation with finance providers, suppliers, insurers, marketing. It is a very complex deal to set up, and there's some risks in there. But it can be done. It can be done.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And then you've got the administration of invoicing and all that sort of.
Absolutely. That's a really interesting part where data comes in, ones and zeros, right? A couple of companies out there who will do all of that for you. You put their device in, it sucks the ones and zeros down. It'll then send a bill to the consumer. It'll send a copy of the invoice to you so you can see what you're doing. It'll send an update to the maintenance guide to say, we've now clocked over 4,000 kilowatt hours on this system. That means you've got to go do some maintenance, so get to the site. It'll send one to the finance company that'll say, the finance is happening, the bill's been paid, or there's a problem or whatever, and maybe another one somewhere else. So these kinds of automated billing systems, data control and billing, and of course the consumer just wants something that says, yep, everything's good, happy days, right? So it can actually pull that data and send it off a bunch of different directions, and that's one of the cool things we'll be seeing. Renata?
Let me first say that if you're actually interested in what Nigel's talking about there, about software solutions and how to do all this, you can come and talk to me, because I'm looking at putting in a proposal with Solar Analytics, which is one of these companies.
Awesome.
So if you have around the managing the data for solar and storage, and I needed a university partner. Then I had a question about with your models and how you think things will change when the various feed-in tariffs start to mature.
Mm-hmm.
The New South Wales feed-in tariff will start to mature at the end of 2016.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be a huge customer base who've had a softer bill for
Yep.
years, and will be suddenly looking for different solutions.
Yes.
So, have you thinking about how that? I presume you're actually testing the market by building your own storage system and working out what you would use as an individual.
Yes. You're absolutely right, and the New South Wales 60-cent tariff is the first major spark in the market, and you can see in the market that there are consumers who are already buying systems that are either storage ready or already have storage on it, and the groundswell. Again, consumers are fickle, irrational. They don't get the details. They simply know that their bill's been $5 for the last 4 years or 5 years, and they're facing the prospect of it going to $100 or $200 if they're out during the day. So to them, it's a no-brainer. And of course,
Do you think they're aware of it yet, though? Are they actually?
I think quite a lot are. I think quite a lot are because they've enjoyed the benefits. They understand that that it makes a big difference to their life. And what you can guarantee, and what's great about Elon Musk, is he's just the beginning of the marketing campaign, right? As soon as the RET deal's done and everyone changes their language and says, right, solar industry's back in business, we're going to see the market start to grow again. And the marketing campaigns, I can tell you, because I've got clients who I'm working on, we're already starting to build the marketing campaigns for the first half of next year. And that will just go berserk. So, you know, what everyone's going to try and do is spend their money in the first half of the financial year, try and see the rewards come through in the next year, and, you know, try and push people, get in before December 30th. Now, whether it's, you know, 10,000 systems or 20,000 systems or 40, it's hard to say.
That's built into your models?
That's built into the models. There's a couple of 100,000 in New South Wales. There's 35,000 in Victoria who are going to roll off a tariff as well. So there's a bunch who sort of transition over time. But once we get rolling, it'll just flow like solar did.
Just a question, because you showed us a very complicated vehicle-to-grid system with smart control in the home. Part of the problem, at least coming from a more computer/technology/networking background, is with such a system, vendor lock-in is a big issue, with a lot of companies deriving their own solutions, say inverter manufacturers, smart home plug manufacturers, home automation manufacturers, running all on their own protocols. Is there, or can you see any standardization efforts, say, to develop an open standard by which data can be exchanged between, say, devices from various manufacturers and interchange to create that smart hub that you would like to see in the future without that, you know, associated exorbitant cost of buying everything from the one manufacturer?
That's the million-dollar question, in fact. I think one of the best indicators of that is that I actually called SMA the other day, who are one of the biggest inverter manufacturers in the world. Got some great technology, have invested, I'm sure, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in all this type of data gear and control gear. And when I contacted them the other day and had a bit of a whinge about some of the problems that installers are telling me about with their own devices, which should be able to do all this kind of stuff, they said, you know, we've realised we probably need to step back from this space, and we're about to very soon announce an agreement with a third-party company who has an agnostic device that we know works with ours. So when SMA says we're going to step back from that space and let someone who's got an agnostic device do the work for us in one part of that puzzle, that's a pretty strong indicator that some of the guys now are going, actually, our role is in power electronics. It's not necessarily in data management. And so you'll pretty quickly see companies like Nest and Google, who had a dabble in this space years ago, I'm sure they're ones and zero entities, right? It's where Enphase are interesting. Enphase are digital guys, really. They happen to have a power device, but their expertise is in data. It's how they make their systems operate. So we're starting to see it. It's going to be a while, but you know, there's plenty of VC money in the US and plenty of smart guys around the world who I'm sure will sort this out, and it's not that hard. I mean, the solar analytics gear is some of the best in the world, and the WattWatchers product that's behind it is a great little widget that does a terrific job at a very, very low price. So it's only a small leap. I mean, I simplify everything down because I don't know how to do it, but, you know, it seems to me that it's a fairly small leap to just take all these ones and zeros and just, you know, bang them up into something that I can read.
Yeah, because there is an associated issue at the moment, especially with smart homes and smart devices and sensors, say, distributed around the house or a wider area, even with a smart grid. And that is, it boils down to security protocols and safety, because the more you're integrating this sort of thing, the more brittle your energy supply system becomes, because it's dependent on that internetworking and it's dependent on a lot of devices working together.
You're so right, and I mean, I'll give you two examples. One is, I know that one of the challenges SMA have had is that you know, washing machines are a classic load in the home that can be shifted to match solar output, for example, right? And one of the biggest challenges they've had is most electronic washing machines need you to push a button. It can be on standby, but you can't actually just turn the power point on and expect it to fire up like you can with a pool pump or a dumb load. So, you know, this electronic finger push is a real challenge, and so getting the manufacturers to open up makes the reality of it actually quite difficult. I got the same issue on my bike. I've got an onboard charger, and I've got two accessory chargers that I use for fast charging, and I use one of my smart load controllers to switch that on at 10 p.m. when my electricity is cheapest. and when my storage system goes in, it'll be triggering the storage to dump and so forth. And I can use a simple device worth $50 to do that. But my accessory chargers need the ignition switch to come on to open the contactor, like an electronic fingerprint, same deal, right? So I can't trigger them. I can trigger the main charger but not the other one, so I can't get a fast charge. Now I can deal with that, I can frig around, but you know, Mrs. Jones, she just wants it to happen 100% of the time, reliably, all the time. So it's, you know, it isn't easy. You should solve that.
More questions? So let's thank Nigel again.
Oh, thank you.